Welcome, my friends. Today we journey to one of the most sacred and enigmatic places on earth, a place veiled in mystery and deep significance, the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. Beneath its golden dome lie secrets whispered through millennia, secrets tied to faith, history, and the very foundations of belief. It's a place where the divine and the human intersect, a focal point for billions across different faiths. We're about to uncover some of these hidden truths and understand why this single structure holds such immense power and tension in the world today. At its heart lies the very rock itself, a cornerstone in the narratives of Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, a place where the presence of God is felt so profoundly, it shapes the course of history. The rock itself, known as the foundation stone, holds a place of paramount importance, particularly in Jewish tradition. It's believed to be the very point from which the world was created, the place where God gathered the dust to form Adam. This stone is also identified as the site of Abraham's near sacrifice of his son Isaac, a pivotal act of faith recounted in the Bible and foundational to the Abrahamic religions. For centuries, this was the location of the Holy of Holies, the innermost sanctuary of both the first and second temples, where the presence of God was said to dwell most intensely. The destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE by the Romans left this site in ruins, but its significance in the hearts of the Jewish people and their faith never diminished. For Christians, while the structure of the Dome of the Rock itself is Islamic, the land it occupies, the Temple Mount, is deeply intertwined with their narrative. The Second Temple, which stood here, was the very place where Jesus Christ walked, taught, and performed miracles. Events described in the Bible, like Jesus clearing the temple courts, took place on this sacred ground. The site holds prophetic significance within Christian faith regarding the end times and the return of Jesus Christ. Although Christianity's primary holy sites in Jerusalem are elsewhere, the historical connection to the temple period and the life of Jesus ties them inextricably to this mountain. The layer of history here is thick, showing how different eras and faiths have built upon, and sometimes conflicted over, the same foundational belief in the sanctity of this spot before God. Then came Islam. Following the capture of Jerusalem in the 7th century, the Umayyad Caliphate built the Dome of the Rock over the foundation stone, not as a mosque for public worship, but as a shrine and a powerful visual symbol of Islam's presence and reverence for the site. In Islamic tradition, this rock is the spot from which the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven during the Isra and Miraj, his miraculous night journey. This journey is a cornerstone of Islamic faith, where Muhammad met with prophets, including Jesus Christ, and received instructions directly from God. The Dome of the Rock thus marks a moment of profound spiritual connection between the earthly and the divine in Islamic belief. So you see, this single structure, the Dome of the Rock, sits atop a place revered, contested, and steeped in the history and faith of billions. It's a physical manifestation of overlapping histories, sacred narratives, and profound acts of faith stretching back millennia. The secrets it holds are not just architectural or historical, they are secrets of the human heart's yearning for connection with God, of the complex tapestry woven by different paths seeking the divine. Understanding the Dome of the Rock means understanding the weight of history, the depth of faith, and the challenging reality of multiple truths converging on one small piece of land. The tensions surrounding it aren't merely political. They are rooted in these deep fundamental beliefs about God, about sacred space, and about who has the right to claim custodianship over this holy ground. It's a place where every stone seems to whisper stories of prophets, kings, and moments when humanity felt closest to the divine. And for the Jewish people, this ground is even more anciently sacred, known in the Bible as Mount Moriah, the site where Abraham demonstrated his profound faith, an act of obedience to God that is a cornerstone of Abrahamic religions. This is the very place where King Solomon built the first temple, later destroyed, and where the Second Temple stood for centuries, until its destruction by the Romans. These temples were the center of Jewish worship, the dwelling place of the Ark of the Covenant, and the location of the Holy of Holies, considered the most sacred spot on earth, where God's presence was believed to reside most intimately. The destruction of these temples is a deep wound in Jewish history and faith, and the yearning for a return to this site, even for the rebuilding of a third temple, is a powerful element in some streams of Jewish thought. During the time of Jesus Christ, The Second Temple stood prominently on this platform, and he himself taught and worshipped within its precincts, a detail central to Christian faith, as recorded in the Gospels. So for Jews, this isn't just history, it's the physical echo of their covenant with God, the heart of their ancient kingdom, and a focal point of future hope. Under the current arrangements, largely a legacy of the post-1967 era, the site is under Israeli sovereignty, but the administration of the Muslim holy sites, specifically the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, is handled by the Islamic Waqf, a trust administered by Jordan. This delicate status quo dictates that while Muslims are free to pray at any time, Jews are generally only allowed to visit during specific hours, and are forbidden by both Israeli authorities and many Jewish religious authorities from praying or performing religious rituals on the mount itself, primarily due to complex issues of ritual purity concerning the site of the Holy of Holies. However, the number of Jewish visitors has been steadily increasing over recent years, often under heavy guard. These visitors are diverse. Some are simply tourists. Others are devout Jews seeking to connect with their historical and religious roots, performing quiet acts that they see as expressions of their faith. This includes circumambulating parts of the platform, reciting psalms silently, or even quietly bowing towards the presumed location of the Holy of Holies. It is this increase in Jewish presence, especially when coupled with acts perceived as religious worship, that fuels much of the current tension. For many Palestinians and the Waqf officials, every Jewish visitor is seen as a potential challenge to the Islamic character of the site. Any perceived prayer or religious act by a Jew on the platform is viewed as a violation of the status quo and a provocation, interpreted as a step towards asserting Jewish religious rights on the Mount, which they fear is a precursor to attempts to rebuild the temple or undermine the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Their faith dictates that this is Al-Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, sacred exclusively to Islam, given to them by God. The presence of Israeli security forces, while intended to prevent violence and maintain order, is also seen by Palestinians as enforcing Israeli control over the site and facilitating what they view as an invasion of their holy space. These guards are caught in the middle, tasked with balancing security, managing access for different groups, and enforcing a complex, often controversial, set of rules. The Waqf representatives, on the other hand, see their role as protectors of the Islamic holy sites, a sacred trust, and often confront Jewish visitors or the Israeli police over perceived violations of the status quo or disrespect towards the mosques. This three-way dynamic, Israeli security, Waqf officials, and the visitors themselves, both Muslim worshippers and Jewish visitors, creates a highly charged atmosphere where a small incident can quickly escalate. The differing deep-seated beliefs about the site's history, its sanctity, and who is its rightful custodian, in the eyes of God, clash daily on this elevated platform. Right, that intensity you see on that elevated platform, the clashing claims over who is the rightful custodian of the Temple Mount or Al-Haram al-Sharif in the eyes of God, these aren't isolated incidents. They are deeply, deeply connected to those foundational stories we touched upon earlier, the ones at the very heart of their faith traditions. Think about the story of Abraham and the sacrifice, the binding of Isaac, the Akedah, as it's known in Judaism, or the sacrifice of Ishmael in many Islamic traditions. For Jews, their sacred texts, the Bible, identify Mount Moriah as the place where Abraham was commanded by God to sacrifice his son, and where Isaac was bound. Mount Moriah has been traditionally identified with the site of the Temple Mount. This event, the Akedah, is central to their covenantal relationship with God, a demonstration of ultimate faith and obedience. It ties the very land, this specific mountain, directly to the promise made to Abraham and his descendants through Isaac. Their synagogues worldwide orient themselves towards Jerusalem, towards the remnant of the temple that stood on this very spot, seeing it as the spiritual center of their existence, a place designated by God. Their faith, their history, their destiny, are inextricably linked to this mountain. Now turn to the Islamic perspective. While Abraham is revered as a major prophet in Islam, and his willingness to sacrifice a son, often understood as Ishmael, is commemorated during Eid al-Adha, the sacrifice itself is typically associated with a location near Mecca, not Jerusalem. However, Jerusalem is incredibly holy in Islam. It is considered the third holiest site after Mecca and Medina. This holiness is linked to numerous prophets revered in Islam, including Abraham, Moses, and Jesus Christ, but profoundly to the Prophet Muhammad's night journey and ascension, Isra and Miraj. Muslims believe God miraculously transported Muhammad from Mecca to Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, and from there he ascended to heaven. Al-Aqsa Mosque complex is seen as having been built upon land considered sacred since the time of Abraham and earlier prophets, a lineage often traced through Ishmael. So while the specific sacrifice event isn't usually linked to the physical site in Jerusalem for Muslims in the same way the Akedah is for Jews, the overall narrative of Abraham and his descendants, of prophets being sent by God to this location, underpins its sanctity and their claim to it. Their faith dictates that this holy sanctuary, granted by God, is an integral part of their history and religious identity, particularly as the first Qibla direction of prayer before it was changed to Mecca. The divergence over which son was to be sacrificed, and where the sacrifice took place, while seemingly a detail of ancient history, feeds into these competing claims over the physical location in Jerusalem. For Jewish faith, the site is inherently tied to the covenant through Isaac on Mount Moriah. For Muslim faith, this site is tied to a longer lineage of prophets, including Abraham, and crucially to the Prophet Muhammad, establishing it as a holy sanctuary, Al-Haram al-Sharif, given by God, connected to that same Abrahamic legacy, but understood through a different historical and theological lens. When you have two faith traditions, both tracing their lineage back to Abraham, both believing this specific site was made holy by God and is central to their identity and covenant, and both having different interpretations of pivotal events like the sacrifice and its location, you have the theological groundwork for intense, deeply felt conflict over who has primary rights and stewardship over that sacred space. This isn't just a political squabble, it's a clash of narratives about divine command, lineage, and the very meaning of faithfulness to God. It's about who they believe God chose, and how that choice manifests in their claim to the land and the holy sites within it. For Jewish faith, the stone holds a profound and unique significance. It's known as the Even HaShatiyah, the foundation stone. The tradition holds that this is literally the point from which the world was created, the geological cornerstone upon which the entire planet rests, and from which it unfolded. Think of it as the very first solid ground that emerged from the primordial waters, set there by God at the dawn of creation. Midrashic literature, which interprets and elaborates on the Bible, describes this stone as the plug or stopper for the abyss, preventing the world's foundation waters from flooding the earth. It is the spiritual and physical navel of the world. This connection to the very beginning of creation makes it inherently sacred, linking the physical earth directly to the divine act of creation by God. But its sanctity is amplified exponentially, because in Jewish tradition, it is believed to be the exact spot within the Holy of Holies of both the first and second temples. After the Ark of the Covenant was lost, it was upon this stone that the high priest would place the censer during the most sacred service of the year, on Yom Kippur, entering the Holy of Holies, only on that day to commune with God on behalf of the entire community. It was the most intensely holy place on earth, the dwelling place of God's Shekinah, His divine presence, a concept rooted deeply in their faith and recounted throughout the Bible. Even after the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in 70 CE, the memory and sanctity of this stone remains central to Jewish faith. It's the reason Jews face Jerusalem and the Temple Mount when they pray, and specifically towards the presumed location of the Holy of Holies, over this foundation stone. It represents the enduring promise of God and the hope for the restoration of the temple, a place where humanity can feel closest to the divine presence once more. Their entire religious life and historical narrative, as recorded in the Bible, is intrinsically linked to this physical location, this stone, and the temples that stood upon it. The yearning to pray freely at this spot is not just a political desire, but a deeply theological one, an expression of their core faith and connection to God and their history. The fact that this same physical location is considered sacred by other major Abrahamic faiths complicates the picture immensely. For Christians, while the focus of their worship is primarily on the person of Jesus Christ and His life, death, and resurrection, Jerusalem, and specifically the Temple Mount area, holds immense historical and prophetic significance. Jesus himself taught and worshipped in the Second Temple that stood on this site. His life and ministry are inextricably linked to Jerusalem, and events prophesied in the Bible concerning the end times often involve the Temple Mount. So while the stone itself might not hold the exact same cornerstone of creation, meaning for Christians as it does for Jews, the ground it occupies is undeniably holy ground for them too, a place where Jesus Christ walked and where God's plan unfolded. And for Muslims, as we touched upon, the site known as Al-Haram al-Sharif is their third holiest site, anchored by the Dome of the Rock which stands directly over this very same stone. This is the stone from which they believe the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven during his night journey, a pivotal event in Islamic faith. They also connect the site to Abraham and other prophets mentioned in the Bible, viewing it as a continuous stream of God's revelation. The dome itself, with its magnificent golden dome and intricate mosaics, is a testament to the immense sanctity the site holds in Islam, a sanctity established by God through their prophet. So you have three faith traditions, all rooted in monotheism and tracing lineage back to Abraham, all converging on this single piece of stone and the ground around it, each with a profound, deeply felt claim to its holiness, based on their unique understanding of history, scripture, whether the Bible or the Quran, and divine command from God. This convergence of sacred narratives creates an almost unparalleled complexity in managing the site, as each community's access and stewardship are seen through the lens of religious legitimacy and divine right. So you have this confluence of profound religious significance, each tradition rooted in their own understanding of faith, scripture like the Bible, the role of prophets, figures like Jesus Christ, and the ultimate will of God. Destroying the Dome of the Rock, therefore, wouldn't just be an act of vandalism, it would be an act of war against a significant portion of the world's population. Think about it. Over 1 billion Muslims regard this as their third holiest site. An attack on it would be perceived as an attack on their faith itself, a blasphemous act that would incite outrage and potentially violent reactions across the globe, from Indonesia to Morocco, impacting communities that feel a deep connection to this place and its importance in their devotion to God. The potential for widespread conflict, religious war, and destabilization is immense, and frankly, terrifying to contemplate. Any entity considering such an act would have to weigh this against the catastrophic global consequences. But the reasons aren't solely about avoiding religious backlash. As critical as that is, the international community also plays a role. The Old City of Jerusalem, where the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif is located, is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This designation places a significant responsibility on all parties involved, particularly those with administrative control, to preserve its historical and cultural significance. UNESCO status isn't just an honorary title, it carries international weight and expectations. Destroying a key monument within such a site would be a clear violation of international heritage protection norms and conventions, inviting condemnation and potential repercussions from the international community, including UN bodies and individual nations committed to cultural preservation. It adds another layer of international scrutiny and protection to the site, reinforcing the understanding that its fate is not solely a local or regional matter, but one of global concern, tied to the shared history and faith of humanity. Even for those who don't share the religious convictions, the historical and cultural value recognized by bodies like UNESCO adds another powerful argument against destruction. Furthermore, the official position of Israel, the governing authority in Jerusalem, is to maintain the status quo on the Temple Mount, preserving access for Muslims to pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and managing visits to the site, including the area around the Dome of the Rock. While there are ongoing tensions and disputes regarding prayer rights and access, the explicit policy is to protect the holy sites for all faiths, including the Islamic holy places. This commitment, though sometimes challenged by events on the ground or political rhetoric, is the stated and internationally recognized framework for managing the site. Any move to destroy the Dome of the Rock would be a complete reversal of this long-standing policy and would severely undermine Israel's standing and legitimacy globally. It would contradict their stated commitment to protecting religious freedom and holy sites. This commitment, though viewed through a political lens, also acknowledges the immense religious significance of the site, for billions of people who find their faith connected to the actions and presence of prophets, including Jesus Christ, and the unfolding plan of God throughout history, as chronicled in the Bible and other scriptures. So you have religious significance, international recognition, and the governing authorities' official policy, all converging to protect this structure. This inherent protection, rooted in faith, history, and pragmatism, brings us directly to that pivotal moment in 1967. Imagine the scene. The Six-Day War had unfolded with stunning speed. Israeli forces, initially focused on other fronts, found themselves thrust into a battle for Jerusalem's Old City. For centuries, Jewish people had yearned for access to this holiest of sites, a yearning deeply embedded in their faith and the narratives of the Bible. When the paratroopers breached the walls and advanced towards the Temple Mount, the emotion was overwhelming. Soldiers, many of whom had grown up hearing stories of this place, the site of the ancient temples, were suddenly standing on the plaza. It was a moment of profound religious and national significance, a convergence of history, prophecy, and military reality. They reached the Western Wall, wept, and some immediately ascended to the Temple Mount itself. The Israeli flag, a symbol of their hard-won victory and sovereignty, was raised over the Dome of the Rock. The exhilaration was palpable. After 2,000 years they were back. This was seen by many as an act orchestrated by God, a return foretold. But then Moshe Dayan, Israel's defense minister, arrived. He surveyed the scene. He saw the flag flying. He understood the immense historical weight of the moment, the connection to the roots of Jewish faith, the biblical prophecies concerning Jerusalem. Yet, he also understood the explosive potential of this act. He grasped that this was not just a military victory, it was control over a site sacred to three major faiths, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, whose adherents trace their spiritual lineage through figures like Jesus Christ and prophets revered by all. Raising the flag over the Dome of the Rock, a distinctly Islamic holy place, was a triumphalist act that risked igniting a far wider conflict, potentially alienating the entire Muslim world and undermining the very stability Israel sought. Dayan's decision was swift and controversial, especially among those who felt this was a God-given moment to fully assert sovereignty and reclaim the site in a purely Jewish context. He ordered the flag taken down immediately. This wasn't a sign of weakness or regret for liberating the old city, but a calculated move born of pragmatic understanding, and perhaps a deeper respect for the complex layer of faiths interwoven with this sacred ground. He knew that asserting exclusive control over the Muslim holy sites by force or symbolism would be disastrous. Instead, he opted for a delicate balance, establishing the framework for what would become the enduring, albeit often contentious, status quo. Israel would control security and access to the overall site, but the Waqf, the Islamic Trust, would retain administrative control over the Muslim holy place. Including the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount Plaza would be prohibited to avoid provoking religious clashes. This decision, controversial as it was, demonstrated a recognition that this site's significance transcends any single national or religious claim. It is a place where multiple narratives of faith converge, where the history recounted in the Bible meets the living traditions of billions. It was an attempt to manage an almost unmanageable reality, shared sovereignty over the indivisible. Dayan's choice, removing that flag, was not about denying the Jewish connection to the Temple Mount, which is profound and central to their faith and national identity, but about acknowledging the reality of other people's deeply held faith and connection to the very same piece of ground. It was an implicit understanding that God's plan for this place, however interpreted, involved a mosaic of humanity, not just one tile. This moment set the tone for the subsequent administration of the site. The administration of the site became a complex dance, a constant negotiation between competing claims rooted deeply in history and faith. But beyond the political and religious layers imposed over centuries, there is the bedrock itself, the physical stone under the Dome of the Rock. This is the immutable core, the very piece of ground around which these monumental structures were built, and these profound historical dramas unfolded. And if you look closely at the surface of this stone, you see that it is far from pristine. It bears witness to every era that considered it holy or significant. Over the centuries, different civilizations, different peoples with their own understanding of God and their own narratives of faith have left their marks upon it. There are cuts and levelings from ancient times, possibly relating to the first or second temples described in the Bible. There are holes drilled into it, perhaps for libations, sacrifices, or anchoring structures. There are smoothed areas where countless hands of pilgrims, of different faiths, have touched it over millennia, seeking connection to the divine presence they believed resided here. Crusaders carved designs into it, leaving their indelible signature on a site that was central to their faith, tied to the life and teachings leading up to Jesus Christ. Muslim visitors and guardians also made modifications, smoothing areas for prayer or placing fixtures around it within the various structures built over and around it. Each mark, each cut, each abrasion is a tiny piece of history, a physical manifestation of the human interaction with this sacred place. Archaeologists like Leon Rittmeyer have spent years meticulously studying these marks, almost like forensic scientists examining a crime scene. But here the crime is simply the passage of time and the accumulation of human activity driven by faith. Rittmeyer's work involves precise measurements and detailed mapping of every cut, hole, and carved line on the stone's surface. He attempts to interpret these markings, trying to understand what they were for and when they were made. His goal is to reconstruct the stone's form and surroundings in different historical periods, particularly during the eras when the Jewish temple stood upon this site, as described in the Bible. He looks for clues that might relate to the layout of the temple courtyards or the structures that stood immediately adjacent to the stone, which tradition identifies as the foundation stone of the world, the very place where God began creation. It's a complex puzzle, deciphering the intentions behind modifications made by people whose lives were saturated with a faith that led them to interact physically with this rock. People whose lives were saturated with a faith that led them to interact physically with this rock, believing it was the place where the divine presence of God was most tangible. One of Rittmeyer's most compelling theories centers around a specific distinct cut or channel on the surface of the stone. It's a relatively shallow, straight line carved into the rock. Now, many archaeologists have observed this cut, but Rittmeyer's insight connects it to the precise measurements and descriptions of the temple found in the Bible. He proposes that this particular cut corresponds to a foundational line or a boundary marker for the structure that stood directly over this rock in the First Temple period, the Holy of Holies, the innermost sanctuary. Think about it. The Holy of Holies in Solomon's temple, as described in 1 Kings chapter 6, was a perfect cube, 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 20 cubits high. This sacred space was designed specifically to house the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark itself, according to Exodus chapter 25, had its own specific dimensions, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. It was within the Holy of Holies that the Ark was placed, and tradition holds that it sat directly upon this very foundation stone. Rittmeyer's hypothesis is that the cut on the stone acts as a crucial reference point, a physical marker that aligns with where the walls or perhaps the very foundation of the Holy of Holies were situated. By meticulously measuring this cut and relating it to known ancient Israelite measurement systems, he suggests that the dimensions indicated by this cut align perfectly with the required space for the Holy of Holies structure. More significantly, if this cut marks a specific corner or side of the Holy of Holies, it provides a strong clue as to the exact positioning of the Ark of the Covenant within that space. He argues that the location and orientation of the cut indicate where the Ark would have rested on the stone, centered within that perfect cube of the Holy of Holies. This isn't just abstract geometry. It has profound implications for understanding the physical layout of the temple and the rituals of Jewish faith. It suggests that this rock wasn't just under the Holy of Holies, but was the base for the most sacred object in the Israelite faith, the Ark, where God's presence was believed to reside. For centuries, this spot was the focus of prayer and the ultimate destination for the high priest on the holiest day of the year. The hope and faith of generations were directed towards this location. Even after the destruction of the First Temple and the loss of the Ark, the Holy of Holies remained the most sacred space in the Second Temple, the space that the faith looked towards, even though the Ark was gone. This was the temple that stood during the time of Jesus Christ, a place he visited and taught within, a focal point for the religious life of the people. Rittmeyer's work attempts to peel back the layers of time and reveal the physical trace of that ancient primary holiness, linking the physical stone to the biblical accounts and the very core of their. So, considering the profound implications Rittmeyer's theory holds for understanding the physical heart of the temple and the powerful role it played in the history of faith, particularly in the lives of those who lived by the Bible and looked for the presence of God, how does connecting these physical details to the sacred text influence your perspective on the Temple Mount and the time of Jesus Christ? Share your thoughts below. I love hearing your insights. And if you found this exploration compelling, please hit that subscribe button, activate the notification bell so you don't miss our future deep dives, and be sure to catch the next video where we'll delve into even more fascinating aspects of this incredible history. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning. Marco.